get started then, and hopefully he will join us soon, right? We want to do introduction round. A lot of people here, but I do want to mention that we have a representative of Israeli FHIR community, healthcare organizations, and industry here. And it's indeed a pleasure and an honor of mine to introduce to Ram. Ram is chair of the division of Mayo Clinic Cloud Platform, and Dr. Pickering, who will hopefully join us very soon, who is a senior anesthesiologist at the Mayo Clinic. And when they will present us how Mayo Clinic, one of the leading healthcare providers in the US, is using FHIR to drive the quality of care and simplify and help the physicians in the day-to-day job. The main idea here is to provide some sort of the showcase where we can be in hopefully very soon, maybe in a year or two, once the FHIR adoption in Israel gains more and more traction. So this will hopefully allow us to dream a little bit and see what the benefits we can eventually reap from the FHIR. So Ram, I'm passing the microphone to you.
Excellent. Thank you for giving me time. I was able to ping Dr. Pickering as well. I'm hoping he joined. Somehow he said he didn't have the link for this meeting. So I sent. Oh, there you go, Dr. Pickering. Thanks for joining us. You and I did not review the script, but I'm hoping you can chime in more specifically those slides 6, 7, 8, 9. Focus on the physician workflow aspects of it, if that's okay with you, Dr. Pickering.
Sounds great. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. I apologize for the dates. I had a family emergency last month, so I apologize for you all for waiting for this meeting. And I'm hoping to share what we're doing for the last 7 or 8 years. And Dr. Pickering will specifically focus, like Ronan said, the use cases that we currently use today in clinical viewer space. So I think it'll be good to walk you through that space as well. Just to introduce, I'm Ram Deeduvanuv. I'm a division chair in IT. I've been with Mayo for 19 years. In May, I'll finish 20 years at Mayo. And I worked in various spaces within IT. We're supporting research, education, shields, and now doing platform and technology. I'm partnering with Google specifically for building Mayo Clinic Cloud, and I'll touch a little bit on Mayo Clinic Cloud as we go through the slides. Dr. Pickering, do you want to do a quick introduction as well?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the invitation. Sorry it took me a moment to join. I had a couple of links that I was sent down a blind alley in. I'm a professor of anesthesiology critical care here in Mayo Clinic in Rochester. I chair our research group and have primary interest in applied clinical informatics. So we've been developing applications for our critical care and operating room practice for the past 15 years or so, and happy to meet everybody and share our experience of that.
Thank you, Dr. Pickering. Please stop us anytime if you have questions. We want it to be as interactive as we can. And if there's something you feel, I know this, let's skip it. Please let me know as well. All right, so the agenda, as you see here, we want to share a little bit about Mayo Clinic. I don't know how many of you know about Mayo Clinic. as well as get into specific details with FHIR around the business cases and some of the technical approach we've taken, and get into question and answers. But you please stop us anytime you have questions. Are you able to see my slide here? Excellent, yes. Thank you. I did send this to Daniel as well. He has the slide deck too, but I thought I'll share. So who we are, Mayo Clinic is a 154-year-old organization. It's a not-for-profit organization. It's committed to clinical practice, education, and research. Our primary value is the patients come first, the needs of patients come first. So that's what all of us, whether you're a physician, administrator, IT, security, we're all focused on that primary value. That's our goal. Our vision is transforming medicine to connect and cure as a global authority in the care of serious or complex disease. That is the big part of our 2030 strategy. How do we cure, connect, and transform is a key topic, and be a global leader in healthcare space. So for providing serious or complex disease care. So that's been our 2030 strategy. Part of the 2030 strategy is we launched our MCP Mayo Clinic platform strategy as a business model, as well as our Center for Digital Health for broader digital transformation, along with this Google partnership for building that data modernization aspects. And I'll touch on the data modernization aspects as we get into the technology landscape. Any questions on Mayo Clinic or Dr. Pickering, anything else you want to add to it as well? All right. So switching gears, a little bit about our current landscape. So today, again, Dr. Pickering will share a couple of those use cases, but we have roughly, we've been doing FHIR and what we call clinical data and notification systems is Mayo Clinic schema that we built prior to FHIR became a standard. When Graham Grieve and others started to push for standardization for broader interoperability, we did have some of these APIs built called patient or observation or procedure, and we call them as clinical data and notification systems. We started that in 2014, and we had a lot of our applications start leveraging those CDANS APIs back in 2014, 2015. Our platform strategy started in 2016, and that's where we started to convert more and more into the FHIR space and started to use our API management platform to interact with other downstream systems, both internal and external. So the FHIR STU, DSTU standard, draft standards, as well as the STU3, we started to slowly migrate our applications from CDANS to FHIR around 2017, 2018 space. So we have about 49 customers, a lot of applications and clinical workflow, as you see here, along with our patient-facing apps, patient mobile app, and patient tracking for clinical trials for research purposes, subjects in general. We do manage a lot of that workload through FHIR APIs. We have roughly about 55 million calls per week. So it's AMP is one of those big hitters, and that's what Dr. Pickering will walk you through, multi-patient viewer, basically acute care multi-patient viewer. Any questions on this slide?
Well, perhaps just to set the context, I believe at one of our previous meetings you mentioned 1.4 million patients that Mayo Clinic has and 20-something petabytes of data.
Yeah, so we have 10 million patients data at this point, and it's close to 29 petabytes. So the more and more we're digesting, that's where we are. We're at 29 petabytes today in the cloud, and roughly about 10 million patients. Yeah, that's correct. What you shared, it's a significant data we're tracking. and we're managing the data. And I think Dr. Pickering will focus on one use case around app-centric, more transactional focused. One may be around AI-based as well. So we do use that data for both workloads, transactional basis as well as AI and ML enablement too, analytical and AI ML enablement. Did that help answer your question? All right. So purely from FHIR, you can see we get a lot of these requests from our customers. They're either centered towards patient platform. I need this data. How do I now present lab information to the patients or their vitals or updating their demographic information or their clinic number change? Now I need to do a contact move or their name change, whatever it is. How do I push those changes? So you see on the left side, it's always about updating the health record of the patient and communicating it back with the patient. Then we have some of these technical things as we convert our existing CDANs, our legacy FHIR, into what we're doing with Google, R4. This is where we do a lot of that work heavily centered around the migration and continue to provide value to our customers with the latest and greatest software currency in the FHIR spec. And then the governance, we spend a lot of time with our data governance and enablement committee. Mayo Clinic being a physician-led organization, we partner with a lot of physicians. Dr. Kaur is our data governance and enablement committee, and we partner with their team to focus on data stewardship and FHIR mapping. So the data quality as well as the definitions are correct from practice standpoint. So that's where a lot of governance happen in the broader alignment standpoint. Any questions on this? This is something you guys have to think as you go in this journey around FHIR, is the data governance and the mapping across the healthcare spectrum. HL7 V2, as you all know, is too general, and the mapping to FHIR spec is always very challenging, particularly if you have a lot of legacy data. And how do you manage that legacy data? All right, with that, Dr. Pickering, I'll pass this on to you if you want to more focus on the provider use cases and touch on provider use cases.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Ram. We're very fortunate in our workspace to have both a kind of active clinical informatics interest at Mayo, a long legacy of leveraging information, and a very kind of talented group of IT folks that we work with. So I don't program, and I don't even pretend to understand all of what Ram is describing here in terms of how data is best leveraged at an enterprise level. But from an end user, I have a number of problems that I need to solve in our health system. We have, as you may know, post-COVID, we have difficulty staffing. We have inexperienced staff. You've heard how much data is generated on our patients through the care we deliver. Really, the question of delivering that data in a timely fashion to bedside providers or to providers that are overseeing a service line, that is something that is very challenging in the EHR workflow. EHRs are fantastic for single patient encounters where you've got a end-to-end process that you follow, you're not interrupted. But when you get to the situation that I'm in, where maybe I have 40 patients or 50 critically ill patients that I'm overseeing, there's a lot of discontinuous processes, there's a lot of parallel processes, and keeping on top of that data and making it actionable is a real challenge. Without FHIR, without that ability to access kind of data and build applications on top of it that can be generated on the fly, we would essentially be tied to an EHR that takes several minutes to launch for every single patient, and we would be completely paralyzed in terms of our operations. So what we have focused on with Ram and his group is building user interfaces for that use case. And maybe next slide, Ram,
Yep.
we could have a look at. So the basic organization of data is around organ systems. I don't know how many transactions we have on every single patient here, but we're pulling data in every minute on about 800 to 900 patients in Rochester, and we're able to drill down at kind of high fidelity to individual patients. In fact, Ram, I've got up on my computer here our live system de-identified data. I don't know if it's helpful to share that with folks or not, but maybe I could run through that for 1 minute just to give an idea of what the capabilities look like.
I've seen the demo Dr. Pickering does. It's good for you all to see it as well, particularly if there's no patient data, Dr. Pickering. I love the idea.
Yeah, it's all.
What do you want? What do you think?
It's all de-identified. Yeah, it's up to you.
Live demos are always great. So yeah, if you can share it to us.
So I'll stop sharing if you want to switch, Dr. Pickering, share your screen.
Okay. So I will share my screen here. So this is live data, 710 patients in our hospital at the moment. I'm organizing this data at the moment by some of our artificial intelligence algorithms. So we've got ASA scores, acute kidney injury, suitability for remote patient monitoring. We have a palliative care filter. We have alerting running for things like SOFA Muse, COVID, whether you have COVID, not COVID, for example, in the hospital at the moment, whether you're in a monitored environment or supported environment. We can very quickly transition from the entire hospital down to a kind of a geographic location of data. So patients that are co-located in one of our intensive care units, we can very quickly drill down on. So I could take that list, I could slice and dice it, identify patients with particular conditions, and then identify where in the hospital they are, and then activate that data or activate that patient and drill down to the unit level, and then down to the patient level, down to the kind of monitor device data level, if you've got a patient that's fully monitored. So we have a very kind of rich environment. We can run a lot of different types of models on the data and use that then to filter and slice and dice our patient populations, and then connect providers with particular expertise to particular patients. Now, I cannot do this in Epic. I can't do it in an EHR. I can't skip from one patient to another as quickly as this. I can't go from 700 patients to a single patient to a monitor, hook into a room if there's a camera in there. This is what kind of FHIR enables us to do, or not just FHIR, but the entire kind of platform approach allows us to do. I'll pause there. I think that's probably enough in terms of the demonstration of what's there. I think you're on mute, Ron. Sorry.
Yeah, let me pick this up. I was trying to message the question that was that, so I was trying to do multitasking, but not effectively. So let me, Ronan, so specifically to that question from FHIR Spec that was posted on the chat messages, there is a work group called Gravity, specifically focused on social deterministic healthcare in general. How does the your neighborhood, or how does your overall care impacted based on whether you're poor, doesn't have education, or any of those things? How do they factor in the overall healthcare? There is work going on in that space. So I'm going to put this in the chat just to answer that question. Dr. Pickering, maybe you can answer as well. There was a question in the chat, which is the one I'm trying to respond. Are you able to see my screen, Dr. Pickering? After some minutes, I moved to another Zoom meeting, but I leave this webinar. How, according to your opinion, the implementation of FHIR can support the effectiveness of medical in poor and low socioeconomic groups of population? So that was the one I was trying to answer here. But
that's a really good question. Now that we coincidentally, with COVID, for example, we recognized that we had a lot of patients arriving in the hospital that maybe had non-standard kind of socioeconomic statuses. And one of our goals is to connect our interpreter services to patients that have complex disease. So we're doing that in the following way. We're identifying patients with complex medical needs using a machine learning algorithm that pulls things like previous medical history and some of the socioeconomic indicators from medical record. And we're using that in that kind of AMP environment to sort and slice and dice the patient population down to high medical need, and applying filters on top of that identify patients that do not have English as their primary language, and connecting our interpreter services to those individuals in the hope that through having that connection to somebody who understands both the culture and language, we can more readily make complex medical decisions and choices around goals with that group of patients. So certainly there may be other ways to do it, but we can leverage FHIR to do that in a way that is highly kind of configurable. And because we're making this up a little bit as we go along, as we learn new things, we can implement changes pretty rapidly and identify what impact that's having on our end services. So from my point of view, having access to that, platform of technologies enables us to do things that would be extremely difficult with a commercial vendor who may not see this as an important problem or an important kind of market to get into. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So I have to admit, in terms of social determinants of health, on the national level, Israel is a little bit behind the States, but this sounds like a specific and sort of a tactical approach we can take and really make a difference in treatment of specific patients. So, and just to make it clear, if you didn't have FHIR, what would be how difficult would it be to implement using conventional vendor API and perhaps external suppliers?
So in practical terms, it's very difficult. I think again, in theory, you should be able to do these things relatively easily in EHR, but when you have a commercial vendor, if you're a minority customer and you're trying to be innovative, you're trying to forge a new path, you're trying to imagine how the practice or the hospital of the future might kind of operate, to go to a vendor and say, we have this need, we think it's important. If it doesn't match their business strategy or needs, it can be very difficult to get them to engage. One of the things, for example, we had difficulty getting our vendors engaging in was this the development of a multi-patient viewer for the critical care practice. That's a relatively small market in terms of all of their customers, and we could not get them to engage in the way we wanted them to engage with us. So to do something that's even more niche or a little bit ahead of the curve through a vendor would be difficult. But in theory, possible, but in practice, having data that you can leverage through these types of tools, it just gives you much more autonomy, much more flexibility. And you can do things that you can take a chance on, things that, a vendor just won't.
Yeah, I'll give you one more flavor. Dr. Pickering answered very specific, again, very clear on why we're doing what we're doing with FHIR. So hope that helps. But the other thing is patients do move. The social deterministics that we capture is based on the area as well. There may be certain topics and the patient may be dealing with certain things based on, let's say, when they're in southern state versus northern state versus Midwest, whatnot. US is so geographically diverse and spread out. So this is where having a standard that covers these topics, so we're all talking the same language and being more interoperable. Without FHIR, like Dr. Pickering was stating, around vendor specific, continue to push them and they may not be engaged in, that sort of a thing. Having an industry standard that we all are speaking the same language when a patient comes from a state that may be under different constraints to a state that maybe have different deterministic topics we need to think about. I think the FHIR enables that from a common standard and interoperability standpoint. So that's one of the reasons why I think the Gravity is one of the HL7 accelerators. I would recommend as they continue to build out the implementation guide for FHIR, I think it'll be good for this group to understand what's coming out of that group and how does that influence what Israeli Ministry of Health is trying to accomplish as well.
Sure. And another, and correct me if I'm wrong here, another benefit is scale and portability. So once you have a use case and you've implemented something and it works, moving it to another hospital with perhaps different infrastructure and different IT systems is much easier than before, right?
With FHIR, yes. Actually, Dr. Pickering can talk about AMP is growing across multiple departments. It started in one department within practice, and it's growing rapidly. So he can specifically talk from a physician standpoint, and then I can answer the technology, why the scalability, as you said, particularly as we change our EHRs. I think it was 2018, if I remember it right, Dr. Pickering, 2019 timeframe. We went from 6 different EHRs to Epic, and having the standard help drive without impacting all the downstream systems. But Dr. Pickering, specifically on AMP scale itself, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, there are two, I think, key aspects to scalability. The one is the technology, and as Ram mentions, having the ability to take that multi-patient view, configure it for, an acute care setting or kind of a complex care patient, and then to represent every patient in the hospital with that view, that's clearly an advantage of the technology. The second aspect of scalability really comes down to how ready is the organization to implement these tools? How do they integrate into the workspace? And it's that ability to kind of configure these tools so that they slot into that environment, because you do need to take account of the workplace that these things are being implemented in. But the general structure that you use is absolutely scalable, and that ability to reconfigure and put this together with some feedback from the end users. That is hugely important, and that's something that with the limited tool sets that you get access to with a commercial vendor is very difficult to do. But in this, the only limitation is your resources and imagination.
Yeah. The other thing that's going on, I'm heavily engaged in the community, so maybe I'll speak about this accelerator group called Argonaut. This is where I did include that in the link, HL7 accelerators, but Argonaut is has participation from various EHR vendors, including Cerner, Epic. You can see their engagement, as well as provider organizations, Mayo Clinic included, along with technology companies like Apple and others. Their job is to continue to focus on building FHIR to meet clinical practice needs and scale when there are gaps, whether it's implementing new implementation guides or new FHIR spec, and make it more matured as we go for clinical purposes. So there's a lot going on in this space as well, with the broader participation, all thinking about interoperability, irrespective of what EHR you use, what technology you may have implemented, but how do I now make it more scalable and portable across? So that's the main focus of this work group as well. Did that help answer your question, Ron?
Yeah, sure. So I want to circle back to the multi-patient viewer for a second. There are several representatives from Israeli hospitals here, and I'm sure they want it right now. So the question is, what would we need to do to take this? I'm assuming it's a smart on FHIR app, right? And implement it in one of the Israeli hospitals.
Ram, I'll let you answer that question. I think from a provider's perspective, I think we have a pretty, we've used this technology for many years in Rochester in terms of, and other hospitals around the US, in terms of the kind of rules and what drives representation. I think there's a very good framework there. I think it'd be very transferable to other kind of healthcare settings. We do kind of map to Epic data specifically. Ram, again, how transferable are these technologies? It's a good question. I think we're really just reaching that point, Ram, where we are really looking at how we get regulatory approval, etc., for things like this.
Yeah, so a great question. I'm trying to read through, Ronan, can you just quickly repeat the question? Because I was trying to read through what was posted in the chat as I'm trying to keep up with the chat messages too. So post the question so I can try to answer the right way.
So I was asking about the multi-patient viewer and what would it take for implementation of it in one of the Israeli hospitals. From the technical perspective, I understand that there are regulatory requirements, and I'm not trying to convince you to give us the source code for free right now. That would be a separate discussion, right? But from the technical perspective, what are the implications of implementation of such a system?
Yeah, so Dr. Pickering, like he shared from a product standpoint, what he shared is exactly right. That's the cycle he's going through. But purely from a technology, underneath chassis is all FHIR APIs. The question then becomes is, how is your data? How is your data map? Because again, the data governance and data stewardship I talked about earlier, particularly with legacy data and how you are ingesting the data. Because end of the day, let's say I take the AMP that existed in Mayo Clinic, now I deploy it in Hospital A in Israel. How is the data managed? How is the data mapped the right way? So that's one topic you have to look at and address the answer. So keep the regulatory aspects that Dr. Pickering talked about, but let's focus purely on technology. I'm trying to answer purely from technology standpoint. AMP version 1, we use a lot of rules. There is a product we use called IBM ODM, and we're slowly starting to move away from rules because we feel a lot of that work could be done, particularly in the Google Cloud space with materialized views and BigQuery, the Google's core analytical / the engine behind is the BigQuery, even for their search and everything. So how do we take advantage of BigQuery that can drive this for AMP as AMP continues to scale is what we're looking at. So moving forward, ODM dependency will go away, but at this point, our current AMP has ODM dependency for rules. That may be other one you have to think about is how do I execute rules and how do I execute models? We have an AI factory for running our models. And if you do want to have some of the decision support driven by models, AI models, where do you execute those models and how do you derive the endpoints that you can link it back to the AMP app? So those are the things you have to think about. Smart on FHIR is one of the things we push it into the workflow from a physician standpoint. There's also CDS hooks. There are other ways we push the data into the workflow. And does your EHR vendor support those hooks into the your provider workflow? Those are other things you want to think about.
Yeah, and I think in the future, one of the so we've been working with EHR data for many years, and a lot of enthusiasm around AI, but clearly a lot of limitations around AI, a lot of limitations about the AI EHR interactions and what data you can kind of extract and make actionable. But the future includes, novel devices. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that having a platform that you can hook new sensors and monitors into will transform how you care for patients, even to a greater extent than we currently see with the availability of EHRs. So having that capacity to kind of use data that maybe is outside the EHR and to incorporate that into models that use medical health data or EHR data is really exciting for us. And I think this move from a kind of behind the firewall kind of rules engine to one that is, may be able to leverage tools that we currently can't, is very exciting for us.
All right. Adi and Ronan, considering we have about 18 minutes here, how do you want to proceed? I do feel we have some use cases we want to go through, or we can answer these questions as well. How do you want to proceed further?
I think maybe going through another use case would be very interesting. Excellent.
So I'll pause this for now. And Dr. Pickering, Daniel, good to see you. I didn't see you on the Teams. Good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
Dr. Pickering, do you want to walk through this topic?
Yeah. So I suppose one of the in the past we've run rules that we've developed from epidemiology databases. So one of the things that we've done in the past was build a sepsis prediction model using logistic regression, on a kind of curated data set. So, that's been our traditional kind of approach, and it works extremely well, but it's difficult to scale. So as we've moved towards this type of platform approach, we have been experimenting with kind of more off-the-shelf kind of AI type approaches. And one of the things that we were able to do quite quickly on the first iteration of this tool was to develop an algorithm that predicted a need for palliative care. So we have a large quantity of patients in the hospital that our palliative care team felt where we're not benefiting from, symptom control, for example. And using these AI models, we were able to essentially take a research lab developed AI, plug it into the live EHR data, and push it into the work stream of these clinicians and do a clinical trial. So that type of capability would have been extremely challenging. Very hard to do this in an EHR vended solution, very hard to do it in the setup that we had before, where we had multiple different types of data streams that were coming from multiple different EHRs, and to do a clinical trial on the scale that we were able to do the clinical trial here would have been very difficult. So that ability to plug, so to take a third-party AI, to plug it into your system and then test it in the work environment, that's a really powerful capability for an organization. Because no matter how excited you might be about an AI's performance in theory or on a development or even a prospective kind of data set, until you plug it into the live environment, you have absolutely no idea how it's really going to perform. So being able to do that here and do limited clinical trials and then, you know, be confident that you can roll out safely into your clinical environment is a really important capability that we're leveraging. So all of those little AIs that I showed at the top of the multi-patient viewer, those AIs are all developed by different groups within Mayo. They all live in different types of Dockers, but we're able to apply them across all of the patients in Mayo Clinic Rochester, Arizona, Florida, our health system, because we can use this technology.
Thank you, Dr. Pickering. You touched on this, but anything specific? I was not keeping up when you were going through the slides, so anything?
Sure, no, I think this is just this point I made a little bit earlier that, you know, the key to scalability is obviously having technology that you can plug into any environment, but the secondary key is, can you actually change practice? Why are you plugging into the environment, and can you support practice change? And a lot of that depends on some of the assumptions you make about what the practice wants. And when you engage clinicians generally, they're not very good at telling you what they want out of the technology. There is a sense that you have to kind of lead through design. You have to design these things, plug them into the environment, and then you know, demonstrate the change that's capable. So, for example, in palliative care, the palliative care in our hospital, and it's true of many of our services, are a consult-based service where they depend on the local provider to recognize that the patient needs a specialist consult and then to put an order in and reach out to that team. Now, and teams are built around that response model. They'll screen their list of consults, and that's their work for the day. To transform them from a group that is passive into one that is actively surveilling a hospital population and trying to identify which patients, because they're the experts, they really should know who they're best able to serve. To change that relationship at the level of a service line is actually very difficult. And the way we've been able to do it with say, something like palliative care is by introducing this AI, educating people about what its limitations are, inserting the AI not into the bedside provider's workflow, but into the workflow of a super user, and to teach that super user how to leverage the technology. That was a very important part of the practice change. And with that, the connection and matching of the expert to the patient became much better in this service line. And that's very important as we move into kind of a future health state where maybe we have difficulty staffing our bedsides with very experienced nurses or experienced clinicians.
Thank you, Dr. Pickering. So Daniel, do you want me to answer these questions on chat? How best do you want us to use the time?
I want, before we switch to the chat question, perhaps I have a follow-up question to Dr. Pickering. So,
yeah,
if I understand correctly, both the multi-patient viewer and this AI system you're talking about, they are not integrated into EMR in the sense that in the classical sense that in a single patient view, right? It's a separate tool that allows physician to get an overview of multiple patients and drill down.
Yes and no. So there, at some point you want to hand this off into the EHR. So being able to screen patients, to reliably identify a true positive, eliminate, noisy false negative, because all of these alerts are noisy. No matter how optimized they are, there's going to be false positives in there. So that's really the key for this particular approach, is that you can surveil a very large group of people with a small set of resources, and then you can truly enrich the patient population that you hand off to a clinical team who, let's face it, their job is to be at the bedside, instigating diagnostic treatment plans and caring for patients. You really don't want them wasting time on false positives. So that's really the power of this technology. And once you find that, then hand it off to the EHR, hand it off to the provider, and just track what happens to that patient who was captured by the device or captured by the alert. You can track through the EHR the processes that arise from that. And you may want to pull those processes back into a dashboard. Say you've got 20 patients who have sepsis, across a health system. Are you really getting antibiotics into all of those patients within an hour? Do we know that we're doing that well? And you don't do that at the patient level. The provider will do it at the patient level, but from an organizational perspective, you really want to see that cohort and follow their progress in real time, and also be able to, implement change in your system so that you do better the next time. So that's where the power of that integration with the EHR, I think, is very important. But it can happen at the level of, I'm just going to call the palliative care team because I'm seeing something, and that activates. Or you can send a page to somebody and say, go visit this patient, and then they can continue the workflow in the EHR. Or you could push it directly into the EHR and say, hey, this is the list of patients you should be seeing. So it's still a consult list, but it's one that is kind of generated through surveillance and filtering.
Yes, so I think that is a really important point for us, because unlike you, we don't have the luxury of Epic or Cerner, and our EHRs are more limited. Most of the Israeli EHRs are much more limited in terms of integration. So building a system that provides indications to clinician, to physician inside the EHR is challenging. But then again, if you're saying that we can build a separate system that can provide you an overview of patients, and with limited resources, we can definitely correlate to this issue, right? So can provide an impact, immediate impact, and we don't need to go into difficult project of changing EHR or expanding EHR ability to support CDS hooks and other interface techniques. So that's really important. So we can build something that can have an impact right now with our existing infrastructure and tools.
I don't think I fully, because you've actually brought me back to the point we were, 10 years ago or 8 years ago here, where we had multiple systems. And in fact, we have multiple systems still when it comes to devices, but integrating those into a single place where everything looks the same for everybody, even if the front end, the gathering data end is very, very different, being able to integrate that and locate it in a single application, I think that is very powerful. And that was one of the original kind of goals for our team kind of 10 years ago, was to take Cerner data and to take GE data and to take, a Chart Plus data set, harmonize them in a database, run rules against them, and then present that as a single point of truth for everybody. And we were able to do that. The challenge was the plumbing from, all of these different systems back to the standardized data set. But once you've done that, then yes, you can represent this and leverage that data in exactly the same way, no matter what the front end system is.
Right, and like Dr. Pickering said, it's the clinician burden too on false positives. So yes, Ronan, from a technology standpoint, there are ways we can do Smart on Fire. We have built Smart on Fire apps, particularly that historical viewer as an example. Like Dr. Pickering said, we loaded all this data from our legacy systems because being a 154-year-old organization for population health and AI space particularly, we will need the legacy data that we didn't move into our current EHR system called Epic, right? A lot of the data exists in GE, Cerner, which we moved it into one data store and harmonized that data. Now, how do we present that into clinical workflow for the physician to see and understand the patient history? That is a historical viewer that's built on Smart on Fire and pushed into the workflow. But we want to be very clear on what we push, because otherwise they'll see a lot of false positives and it may generate noise that may cause a physician not to pay attention to what information we're sending. This is why we have clinical governance that's focused on the clinician burden, and we want to send the right alerts into the workflow. So yes, the technology exists, but we are very thoughtful on what alerts do we send into the workflow.
Ram, if I may, there is a question in the chat scene, and apologies. Is it Ailet Aviva?
Ailet.
You
were very close.
I'm sorry about that. You know,
You're all good.
I do apologize.
You're totally fine.
So this is a really good question, and I think, you know, I would say let's get the technology out of the way. I mean, my view is that Ram, I should never talk to Ram or see Ram. Ram should just be able to deliver what we want. But there needs to be some interface between, you know, the technologists and the clinical practice. And the only way we've been most successful is through this multidisciplinary approach. And you know, our current kind of AMP team is really very much a multidisciplinary team. You have somebody like me who has a tiny bit of kind of knowledge, but is able to maybe translate requirements and other kind of insights, if you like, to the technology team. We need to evaluate whether the technology is working or not. So you clearly need an evaluations arm. You need to build in your outcome metrics right up front into your infrastructure. You need an implementation group. Are we ready to implement? Is that why we're failing? You need so many different, you really need what we call our applied clinical informatics group, which really brings all of these pieces together and helps us be successful. But yes, you can't build a technology and expect it to work. You do need these multidisciplinary approaches, even for FHIR-based solutions.
And I'll give a little bit of color commentary that Dr. Pickering covered from a solution standpoint, particularly delivering value to our workflow with clinicians, but purely from a technology behind screens topic, this is where the data governance and data stewardship becomes really key. Even for FHIR-based solutions, even though the FHIR has a standard spec, how do we map the data? This gets into some of the questions I saw up about the QA testing. The QA is multifold, but I'll try to answer from this question standpoint is, we do focus on the data stewards are the ones who understand the data. They are helping us say, this particular patient vital, this is what it means, and this is what it needs to be mapped to. And here's what all the different terminologies we need to support. And here's what the data dropdown should look like in the UI from a terminology standpoint. So a lot of that work is being done with our data stewards, and data governance manages that with IT. So there's a lot of multidisciplinary work, even part of the FHIR spec and FHIR mapping, and data quality is a key role in that space, that our data stewards and others are verifying our FHIR data is mapped right way, and what we're presenting to the UI is showing the right information as well.
And Ram, I just make one other comment in terms of the interaction with the frontline users or the stakeholders, you know, at the organization level. I think the most important thing to define up front is what problem you're solving. You know, we often think we've got a problem that we want to solve with a piece of technology because either it's cool or we think it's going to be useful. But I think that definition of the problem to be solved is so important, and that's where a multidisciplinary team approach, I think, makes such a big difference.
So I'm going to quickly go through these questions. FHIR server did you use? It's a when we started in 2016, 2015 with Graham Reeve coming to Mayo Clinic, Rochester. Our initial attempt was Happy Server. And then we moved to Akana because we bought Akana as a part of the broader API platform. Again, we're not endorsing any technology, so please don't think that just because I'm stating some companies doesn't mean we're endorsing them. In fact, we're moving away from Akana now with Google, part of their healthcare APIs. All of that is leveraging Google technology, basically. But we went through different iterations with our FHIR server. There are always challenges, even though the FHIR spec is a standard. What did that organization implement? As I said before this Google partnership, we were STU3. Epic, as an example, if you go to Epic website, they do have backward compatibility for a lot of those APIs, but other EHR vendor may not. And this is where we run into challenges based on the API maturity. FHIR does a really good job that shows every API, what's the maturity level and whatnot. But there were some of those challenges that we run into, and mostly it's all about patient access, what authorizations those individuals have they consented for sharing data. Those are the kind of things we deal with versus the FHIR from an interoperability standpoint. It's more about patient consenting and do we have the right consent to share the data with organizations. Are you using FHIR repository server? So our STU3 was a facade. We built it in real time. So what Dr. Pickering was showing for AMP was a facade. The R4, we do have an LPR, which is our FHIR store, longitudinal patient record, and that is all through FHIR repository. So the new work we're doing with Google is all through FHIR repository, but the previous versions of our FHIR implementation was a facade. Dr. Pickering answered this question already. I think that was it. Did I miss anything else?
I think that was it. Yeah.
Any other questions that Dr. Pickering and I can help? I know we're past the time, but anything else I can help?
So if you still can spare us a little bit of time, can you talk a little bit more about the data governance and data quality, and specifically if you have any tools that you use, because frankly the FHIR ecosystem in terms of data quality and governance is not very rich.
Yeah, so quick answer is yes, there again, as we can go more and more into Google Cloud, they will evolve. As you know, Google has released Dataplex for the data catalog and data mesh strategy. This is something we're looking very closely. But currently we have Informatica. Again, we're not endorsing any technologies or any companies. Please don't take that way. In fact, my public affairs team told me, don't name any companies, but since you're asking the question, I'm stating it's just that what we've used. Informatica is what we have used for terminology purposes, and data governance, we have Collibra for our data catalog and metadata aspects.
And you using Calibra to catalog FHIR data?
We use Calibra to catalog all data, whether it's FHIR or not.
Cool. Okay, so I think we passed our time. Daniel, I see you're back with us. You want to?
I prepared a lot of questions, some business related questions for Ram from the IT administration point of view, and some more clinical for Dr. Pickering. But I want to be respectful of your time, and if it's okay by you, I'll send you an email with some of the questions that I received from other participants as well. And I want to thank you again for your time, for the effort. It's amazing, and you know, the place where US is in terms of adopting FHIR as a standard is obviously way ahead of where Israel is currently, and every help we can get from excellent organizations like the Mayo Clinic, and specifically you is admirable, and thank you very much, both of you, for doing this.
You're very, very welcome. I'm always surprised at the enthusiasm and that people have for what I'm doing in an office and what Ram is doing in a big fancy building. Admittedly, I spend most of my time in the clinic, but no, we have been very fortunate in Mayo to be able to be a little forward thinking. We've definitely made mistakes, and we can certainly share those mistakes with you. And if you do have questions, or are there any kind of follow-ups, we're very, very happy to answer those.
Feel free to send all questions to me, and I'll send one concentrated email to Ram and Dr. Pickering.
Excellent. Thank you for having us, all of you.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Have a
Bye.
nice day.
Thank you.
Bye.